Hello again. This video is a compilation of all the best bits of me making a record player out of scrap and stuff left lying around my house.
I had this weird idea that maybe as modern record players are pretty unmitigating lumps of plastic junk like this, it might be possible to actually make a record player out of scrap and just bits and bobs found around the house. After a bit of thought, I thought, why not a lid from a sweet box or a sweet tub like this. Now I need a motor obviously to drive it, and I'm going to drive it by putting a motor up against the rim like a lot of turntables are driven. This is also a very useful way of stepping the motor down because they turn far too fast. But I've also decided I'm going to use another motor in the middle as the bearing. The best thing I found so far is this fan. Now it spins nice and smoothly. This whole bit at the back turns round, and although you can't really see it in the video, there is actually a little dimple in the middle showing you what the centre is. So now it's a moment of truth. I've sawn around the fan, and I'm going to separate it and we'll see whether it's going to work. Right, anyway, so that bit's off. Okay, it's a bit rough, so maybe I'll just cut the fan blades off as well, and then that should actually pivot quite nicely. Right, starting to look at how it's all going to fit together. I've actually left the fan blades on, and I've just gone round with a craft knife and it's cleaned it all up so it actually does spin nicely and quietly. Now in terms of driving the turntable, I'm not going to use the fan motor because it would try to drive it far too fast, so I'm going to mount a motor on the edge. Now I had thought about using this little motor here. If we try just powering that up, now it's not a very big motor, it's not very powerful, and it is actually quite noisy, so probably not the best choice. So I had a hunt around. I still didn't find the little motor I'm really looking for, but I did find this motor here. And this is a Como Drills motor. This is actually probably quite a good quality motor. Turn on the voltage. Now it's not silent. It's got a fair amount of torque to it, and it's got a nice mounting bracket which I'm sure I can make use of. Okay, it's now to try a quick motor test. So we turn the power on and we put this against the rim, so this effectively is a step down. Turn the high speed DC motor into something much more like 45 RPM, which is what we're looking for. So, not perfect. Going to have to put some padding, I think, maybe some heat shrink on the shaft of the motor, and probably also mount the motor so that it's a little bit of weight, a little bit of pressure against the turntable like that. Well, I unexpectedly had a spare hour this morning, and well, actually about an hour and a half later, this is what I've come up with. So I've been doing the motor mounting. Now I'll be the first to admit this is rather more complicated than I expected or intended, but I decided that as the platter or turntable wasn't quite true, or at least the edge of it wasn't quite true, it seemed to be centered pretty well, that I would actually have an adjustable mount. So first things first is I've put a little bit of little bit of heat shrink on the shaft, so that's just to make sure that the shaft doesn't slip on the edge of the turntable. And I've also used the little motor that is one of the ones out of a PlayStation 2 controller, so I've actually made use of the counterweight, or the offset weight. You can see it just there, so that's just glued onto this piece of wood. The motor's screwed on with a couple of little screws, and I've just hot glued it onto some scraps of wood and then clamped it to the base so that it won't move. And the turntable itself is hot glued to the block of wood underneath, but I haven't actually glued it onto the base yet. I've just used an old vise there just to stop it moving around. So anyway, I'll just connect it up properly and we'll give it a go. Okay, so here it is running. It's a bit noisier than I'd hoped for, but there you go. It's just a scrap built record player. You can't have everything. So I've used a couple of hooks here, an elastic band, and you can actually see the way the elastic band is actually keeping the pressure. So as the slight unevenness in the edge of the turntable comes round, the elastic band actually allows the motor to move in and out a bit, so it actually keeps the motor in pretty good constant contact with the turntable, and that should mean that we get a pretty constant speed. Now, you'll notice I've moved the motor to the other side of the board. This is because otherwise there just wouldn't be room to put the tone arm over here. Okay, so I've got the central post in. I'm going to clean up the top a little bit and probably use some red tape just to disguise the design a bit, and then I'm going to use this material here. This is a non-slip covering. It's used for placemats and stuff. I'm going to cut that. I'm going to make a compass out of that ruler and that pen, and cut a circle and basically put a mat on. Right, all cut out now. Try it on the platter next. There we go, with a bit more red tape to cover up the design underneath, and I just placed the mat on. I haven't stuck it in place. We'll see whether I need to. So anyway, really starting to look the part there. So you may wonder why I've got this rather cheap and nasty ion deck on the table again. So the reason for this is I'm now onto the Tonearm, so I'm going to use hopefully a straw. Now this is rigid, but we'll see if it's rigid enough. It's about the right length, and as you can see I'm using this deck as a comparison. So the other thing that I need is the mount for the or the head shell that mounts the cartridge in, and I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to copy it using a piece of balsa wood. I'm just going to mark out something similar on balsa wood. Now this one takes cheap and nasty ceramic cartridge. I too have some cheap and nasty ceramic cartridges. These aren't exactly the same, but they're very similar. I do have the correct pins for that, so I can attach the cables. So I was thinking maybe some sort of universal joint, and I was thinking, well, springs can be used as universal joints, and I found this one here. This is actually an expansion spring, but it's also works quite well as a universal joint, and it actually will slip inside this straw. So if I take that into position and then sort of screw that to the woodwork, that would actually work as a very simple universal joint. Right, I've now wired up the cartridge, so I've connected up one of the channels through the wires here to a standard phono jack going into this old amp and going out to a pair of cheap headphones. So now to assemble and mount the Tonearm. Time now for a little test. I'll put the stylus down in the middle of the record. There's still a tracking problem. I think the mechanism by which I'm pivoting the tone arm is just not adequate, so I'm going to have another look at that, but let's give it a go. So there's the tone arm. Previously I just had a spring attaching it to the mount up here. It worked, but it was inadequate and the angle of the tone arm moved about far too much. So I found enough cut of wood just here. I'm going to use another little fan as the pivot. I don't think I'm even going to bother cutting this one down. I'm going to use a little bit of balsa wood, just glue that on there, cut it down and glue it on there. I'm going to use a pin, put it through a little bit of this, then straight through the plastic of the tone arm and into the balsa wood, basically so. I just quickly hold it up. This will go on here, this will go on here, this will go like this, and so it'll be able to turn around like so and also pivot up and down, but basically won't be able to twist, which is what the problem was. Okay, I've now finished the tone arm mount, so you can see it in the picture there. It's here, so the tone arm can move back and forth, up and down, and yet it can't twist side to side, so the angle that it is against the record is pretty much constant. So let's start her up. Right, well that was a little burst of Party Time. It's a record from the 50s which has a variety of songs, I think all as one continuous track. Here I've got an LM386 circuit. Okay, this is the circuit diagram I've used for the LM386. I've got the input signal coming in through this 10k variable resistor going off to pin 3. I've got the ground for the signal coming in and going to pin 4, which is the ground for the LM386. I've got the 9 volt power supply coming in on pin 6. I've got it connected to ground via 330 microfarad capacitor, electrolytic capacitor. That's to reduce noise. On the output side I've got a 220 microfarad electrolytic capacitor to basically remove any DC offset, going to an 8 ohm speaker going to ground there. Right, that's the LM386. Okay, so I've connected the LM386 circuit to the record player, so let's give it a go. So that works pretty well. That's probably enough on the amplifier. Next will be the motor control circuit.
In this series I didn't cover off motor control, but I was using just an LM317 voltage regulator like the one on this board here. They're very easy to wire up and quite cheap too, only a couple of pounds or so. I don't bother buying heat sinks, I just use a nut and a bolt through the mounting tab hole, or use some piece of metal that I've got left lying around. Okay, that's it for this video, and probably for the scrap built record player as well for the minute. If you'd like to know more, please take a look at my full series or leave me a comment. Thanks again. Please like and subscribe.